Hi, everyone. Welcome back if you were here yesterday, and if not, welcome to the 2017 MIT Water Summit. So yesterday's theme was watering our crops, so we talked a lot about water use in agriculture. So today's theme is growing our protein. So we'll first kick it off with a keynote speech from the former executive director of the Water Footprint Network. Then we'll have a panel on meat production, another panel on fisheries and aquaculture, and a final panel titled The Path Forward, which will be a conclusive panel looking at all of the previous panels and sort of reflecting on the different topics that we've talked about over the course of the 2 days. So with that, I will introduce our keynote speaker, Christoper Briggs.
Good morning. Thanks very much indeed for inviting me here, MIT Water Club. And I'd just like to say how impressed I am, first of all, being in MIT for the first time, but also with the work of the MIT Water Club to have set up this as the 5th of their summits. Just speaks volumes for the quality of the students and their abilities. I know when I was doing my PhD, I would not have been capable of such things. So all credit to you, and may this continue for a long time. It's not just an interesting subject, but it's one that we have no choice. It is our life. And I'm going to start with a consideration about water. A famous British poet called W.H. Auden during the First World War said, "Thousands have lived without love, not one without water." You get 3 days really on a reasonable time before you run out of life if you don't have water. And so most of us in this room already appreciate the importance of water and also understand that there is a clarity now, an increasing clarity about why there are problems. We've seen in the World Economic Forum in increasing depth the amount of value and problems that the governments and companies see in water. Water crises comes there in the top 3 in the last 3 years, and I don't think it's going to disappear from there. The Carbon Disclosure Project, which is self-reporting by companies, also shows 2/3 of the largest companies really consider there's a serious risk of their bottom line being affected by water. So these are issues that matter. And because they matter, we need to see how best to measure and how to handle and how to advise. And the Water Footprint Network evolved out of these concerns about how do you measure and how do you inform. The current situation is a mere 4 billion people face water scarcity problems for 1 month a year. And obviously that only gets worse with climate change. It's also very true that we are producing a lot of crops in rather dry areas, and that has a heavy pressure on other users of the watershed, other needs within that watershed. And the idea of the water footprint was developed by a Dutch scientist and others, particularly Dr. Arjen Hoekstra, and in the University of Twente developed the concept of having a water footprint and measuring it across 3 components: the green, the blue, and the grey. And the green footprint really relates to that which falls from the sky or is dew and incorporated around the roots of plants and then either transpired through the leaves or evaporated off the surface. In other words, that water is consumed. It is not available to us again or to the plants. It's gone. And in green, you can also consider that when you pick a plum or a strawberry or a raspberry, that water is also not available to that area. And so the green water is all about that which falls from the sky. And the blue water is about the remains of that water coming into the aquifers, into wetlands, into rivers and streams, and being extracted for principally agriculture and for our drinking water, our leisure, our pleasure. So that blue water, when it is used for producing crops or computers, is used up only when it is evaporated, transpired, or moved into another water basin. that is the way that it is described in terms of use. So obviously there's a very large volume of blue water and only a smaller proportion of it that is actually used up and only then becomes available again when it falls as rain sometime in the future. Now, to complete the picture, Arian and other scientists considered that it was helpful to try and measure grey water, the level of pollution. And this level of pollution is obviously difficult because there are so many different pollutants within any supply of maybe a cannery or a vachery. And so it is looking at the most important pollutant within a water source coming out and going into a water basin and considering how much more water would be needed to dilute or assimilate that pollution to a level that was ambient water quality standard. A complicated concept, but one that has been seen to be relatively useful for a number of people. And the work of the Water Footprint Network has been to combine forces, to bring together various people, to share results, to share experience, and to carry out analysis for countries and companies about their supply chains or their product or what's happening in a watershed, and help them to understand why and where the water is flowing from and to, and how they could possibly change it. So our advisory role has been carried out for the last 10 years. It's not surprising that there's a lot of our work that carries out right in the field in agriculture, because 92% of the water footprint of the world is agriculture. And out of that, 29% is meat production. Those are large figures, and they are obviously the results of a number of calculations, but you can be pretty sure that agriculture is not going to change in its position for a long time as the major user and pressure on water. I put together a slide here on the water footprint of the average consumer in the US, and this is a little bit dated, so I can imagine things do change from 2011. But just look at the meat. 31% of the water footprint there is meat, and then 15% on sugar and sweeteners. Slightly different from other countries, as you might imagine. All your cars, all your computers, all your technology is there in industrial products. Small amount of water you need for that. And if you then add up all the cereal, the vegetable, the nuts, the oils, and all of those things that you might consider to be as healthy or healthier than meat, that's less than 20%. So meat has a real occupational hazard for us in terms of how much water it is using. An average of 7,800 litres a day. That's not what you get in Pakistan. It's not what you get in much of the world. So it's a water-hungry and water-greedy country. And even despite that, it actually has a relatively low external footprint, because if you look at the total water footprint of the US, it's mostly inside. 80% of it is actually inside the US, and only 20% sits outside. So you've got to get maize in larger quantities, so it comes in from Mexico. Soy, massively produced in Brazil, considered to be the largest exporter of virtual water in the world, Brazil. And then again, we don't grow cotton as much in the US as we need, and so there's imports from Pakistan, India, China, Bangladesh. And those are the major imports to the US in terms of where the water footprint is visible. In the EU, for which we've just done a 29 country study looking at their footprint and their footprint outside the EU, 38% of the footprint of the EU is outside the 29 countries. Completely different picture from the US. As you know, most of what we have is a Mississippi basin, and it is only the Yangtze that is the second largest basin and the second largest water footprint in the world. So let's see what we use 29% for. What a lovely ticket. Over 3 million litres. It takes 3 years for you to get to 200 kilograms of boneless beef. and a lot of care and a lot of love. But that's also a significant amount of water. And where does it come from? Well, it doesn't really come from the drinking and servicing, because that's 1%. It comes all from the hay, the silage, the haylage, the alfalfa, and even more importantly, 2/3 is in the grains. The grains are really where you get a much heavier water footprint. So that is the issue that one has to consider, is that when you have feedlots, the feedlots are obviously going to be using high quality wheat, oat, barley, corn, etc., to build up the bulk and the meat of the animal. And they do that quickly at a cost, because it's more expensive, but at a cost of water. And if you look at it on your table, there it is, a kilogram of beef, 15,500 litres. These are averages. And these are litres because, although I do love gallons and pounds, we did get rid of them in the UK, and everybody else got rid of them, and we really don't think acres feet is a great measure for water. But when I understand what an acre foot looks like, I'll go back to it. So litres is what we use around the world to be able to have comparability, and I think it's really important for us to have some sort of shared language, because it's possible to imagine what a litre looks like. Gallons is more difficult, it's too big. Now, here's a kilogram of beef. Doesn't look too bad. It's going to cost you. And if you go into McDonald's or some other excellent place, for 150 grams of meat, you can have a great meal, and only 2,400 litres. Yeah, it is a heavy cost on water. But, you know, if you're going to be using 31% of your total diet on water, then that's what you're going to be doing. Not all meat, of course, has the same footprint. It's a big difference from where and how it is grown. If you're there in the top left and you are in a nice field and you're growing your body on grass, you're not going to have such a large footprint. And it's really only when you look at these production facilities, industrial level, industrial scale, massive amounts of imported soy or produced corn or wheat, and somewhere in the middle of that, you've got a rather lot of cow shit, large amount to be able to process and get rid of. And that obviously is another sort of problem. That's the grey water. We don't worry about that when we've got large-scale grazing systems, but we do have to when we're in feedlots. And we heard yesterday how well controlled that is, but it's never going to be a zero-sum game. It's a cost, a serious cost. And if we are trying to understand a little bit about the feed conversion, looking at chickens, pork, and beef, you can see that there's quite a large difference in the feedstuff conversion efficiency, how quick, how good that efficiency is changing when you move from open grazing to industrial systems. That's the reality. It is a very much more efficient conversion in the feedlots. And the cost of it is obviously that you're going to have higher nutrient roughage. If you can afford it, you can do it. The question is, do you have the water as well? But you have to consider that those are the options, whatever sort of meat you're growing. A more complicated table, and I hope you can, you can read that. Let's imagine that you want to choose your own diet and you're just looking at water and water footprint as being important. Then clearly growing nice vegetables and carrots and potatoes and parsnips, it's not going to cost you very much in the way of water, 300-400 litres a kilo. And even if you incorporate a bit of fruits within that and cereals, you're still not going above 1,500-1,600 litres a kilo. But if you start then thinking of meat, oh, that's a bit unfortunate, didn't mean to do that, pressing the wrong button. If you start looking at meat, oh, it won't show in here, will it? If you start looking at meat here, you can see the differential is quite large. Chicken, butter, pig, sheep, goat, and beef. And that is really where you can start to see the pattern. It's related to the conversion efficiency, obviously. Chickens are pretty good at converting food into meat. Pigs are remarkably efficient as well, but it ain't good when it's sheep and goat and cows. And of course you could go for GM, but you are definitely in a situation where currently it is so incredibly expensive on water to grow cows. You can change it. GM salmon, which you're going to be lucky enough to have soon, has just double the rate of growth of ordinary salmon. You can do it. It's a choice. And that's really what it's all about. It's a question of what it is that you want to eat. You have all these pulses. You can live very well on a protein and have enough nutrition from all of these. You can even combine milk and eggs and have some of the products. But it is going to continue to cost you a lot to have meat in large quantities. And it will show. It'll show when you look at the litres of water that you need per kilocalorie, which is another way of looking at the efficiency. Half a litre per kilocalorie when you're looking at nice cereals and starchy roots, and just a little bit more for delicious beef. 20 times more. Take your choice. But what we have done is try and get it possible for people to understand and have comparability, having the same data so that you can understand what it's going to cost you, so that countries and companies can make decisions based on data. It's not that science is a very good basis for making decisions, and it certainly isn't true that science is used by many people making decisions. But you do need to have that raw data if you are going to be able to have a situation where you're making a better world for most people. I love this picture. And I love the fact that the drought in California has gone away. And I fear that some people may think that it won't come again. Yeah, okay. Well, they are not in a good position because it is going to come back again and again and again. And the question is, what are you going to do? Well, California is brilliant. They have not done the recycling of water that you can do. Spain recycles 20% of their water and uses it for agriculture, and Israel, 90%. Nobody else gets even close to that. Now, they do have problems, but they have a pretty harsh environment, and they have fantastic production of vegetables, crops, etc. So you know you can do it, because California, with the most appallingly difficult and increasingly hard, rough, dry climate, is producing things like almonds. The largest producer of almonds in the world. 10% of the water of California, 5 billion a year profit. Alfalfa, 15%, massively exported to Southeast Asia for countries that don't actually have alfalfa, and incredibly powerfully important for production of meat here within the US. So you wouldn't really think that animal feed, haylage, silage, would be the top water user within California, but it is. All those fields. And the almonds and walnuts, well, we'll talk about them in a moment. They are not cheap on water. You've stopped really using oranges in California as a major crop, but you've gone on to something that needs quite a lot as well. And people, cleaning cars and all the rest of it, coming a bit lower. And rice, it is number 2 in the United States in rice production. Number 1 in grapes, and they do it. So you have choices. You have the ability to be extremely profitable with the heat and the systems, but you've got to make the choice. And you also have a possibility, as we've heard from people on Union for Concerned Scientists, that you can really look at using grain-fed agriculture. We can think about how we can increase the productivity of green water crops. We can move towards grazing or mixed systems. We can reduce the concentrate feed, and we can stop growing things up in mountains or down in wetlands and draining them. We can do that, if we want to. We do need to think about how to clean up the agriculture. We do need to think about getting more precision farming and ensuring that we are reducing the use of fertilizers. we don't want to have a lot of antibiotics in the water supply. Just as a side remark, one of the things that was not discussed yesterday on the reuse of water is that there are a lot of chemicals in water that you can't get rid of without a lot of money, including endocrine disruptors and ibuprofen. So whenever you have ibuprofen, just imagine it's going to be around for about 50 or 100 years in the water supply. Difficult to get rid of. A whole set of trace elements that people really don't want to have in their drinking water, but they're there. And so when we talk about preventive antibiotics, no excessive manure, we know what the problems are on NPK, that we've got to think about how to control that further upstream, because it's going to cost us when it is in our groundwater, when it is in our aquifers. So can we get people to understand about this? Does the work of people like Water Footprint help in informing buyers, consumers, and companies about what are the risks and what are the problems? Don't know. Meat is problematical. Average 47 kilograms a year. They think it's going to go up to 60. It's going to go up to 60 because we've got a population that's growing to 9.1 billion by 2040 or 2050, depending on whether you believe FAO. And when you hit that, to be able to service it, we have to take on another billion tons of cereal a year and 200 million tons of beef. And that is without sorry, I meant meat, not beef. 200 million tons of meat a year, and that is without incorporating the aspirational aspect to meat eating, which is poor people like to eat more meat when they get richer. So 200 million tons of meat a year, quite a lot. You can see who are the big eaters: UK, Spain, Australia, US, today. It's going to change. But that isn't going to change. If you wanted to invest your money, quite clearly, investing in meat would be a very sound thing. We're only at 2010 now. You can imagine it's going to go up. So what are we going to do? Well, it's pretty good citizenship to shower and save water by having it shower with your friend, or to reduce the amount of water in the tap, and to stop dripping when you're brushing your teeth. But it ain't gonna make a lot of difference when it is 92% of your water is out there in the fields. If you want to make changes, of course, you can change the crop. Reducing the amount of meat would make a significant difference. Even on bringing down just a little bit of meat, you can get down to 800 litres a day, yet less. Big figure, big choice. Or you can go for fish. Great. I'm a marine biologist, so I fully approve of eating fish and all substances. And we have dramatically increased from 96 up to 146 million tons a year. Pretty good. Nothing like meat. We're at 270 million tons a year of meat. So we've got a way to go, but fish will grow. It has to grow on land mostly, or in cages, because it's very difficult for humans to manage shared resources. The tragedy of the commons means that if we're trying to fish and agree on who gets the profit from it, we don't. We can't, unless it is crisis. We've seen too many examples, and it is not just the fact that cod is much more expensive than it should be, because we managed to fail on the whole of the Atlantic, and various other crops are overexploited. FAO kindly says only 33% of fish crops are overexploited. Well, then there's another 30% that are just on the edge or are in bad recovery. So we're not going to be able to get the fish from the sea, because that's a real big management issue and a fisheries issue. So we're going to do aquaculture. And just guess who's leading? China. 74 million tons of aquaculture, 16, and they're going up to 20 million tons a year. They're going to increase. And the water footprint for freshwater fish is clearly there. Only when the fish are being fed terrestrial products. When they're being fed remains from fisheries or small fish, you don't see a water footprint, but it's mattering, it's important for our ecosystems. But what is clear is that there is a big balance here between whether fisheries will be able to continue to catch lots of small fish and use those for feed for chickens or for fish or mice or whatever, or whether there will be a push towards using more oil seeds and pulses, etc., for feeding aquaculture. A lot of work, a lot of investigation, most of it in Asia, principally in China, but more work going on in Chile and Norway. US, lots of space there, lots of possibilities, but it's not really so popular. And we're not quite sure how that is going to go, but it is inevitable that fish will become more popular. More popular than meat, perhaps one day. But there are other choices, and if you look at the figure of 15,500 litres a kilogram of water to produce beef, then you can say, well, soy's good. Yeah, but there is still an ongoing argument about what and where that soy is coming from. Is it really coming from areas that have been deforested a long time ago, or is it from areas that are going to be deforested soon? Is it the Mato Grosso, or is it down in Bolivia, etc.? There are implicit problems and choices in all of the questions that we look at in terms of choice. But if we just want to get protein in economically and practically, it's good to eat a lot of vegetables and pulses and grains. It feels like it's really good as well to eat nuts, but I hate to disabuse you. They really are even worse or as bad as, well, goat. Look at the figure for almonds, 16,000, 1,100 litres per kilogram. And cashews, not much better. They're heavy users of water. They are drying, or they're living in drying areas, and they are not terribly careful. And they're low croppers on trees. So maybe people will be better and grow more walnuts and more efficiently. Don't know, we'll see. My bet is insects. 2 billion people eat 1,900 different species of insects today. They are delicious. But it's quite difficult to convince Americans and Europeans to eat them, but they are very efficient in terms of conversion and low footprint. So maybe we'll do more of that. We have algae, we have fungi, we have textured vegetables that look like meat, taste like meat. We can grow leather from a flat sheet of microbes. We can do an awful lot, but we need to make a choice, and we need to think about what we can afford to do or what the planet can afford us to do. This is a time when the population is increasing so much, and we know that the population is increasing principally in Africa and in a few countries in Asia. It's not going to increase in North and South America. And so how things are carried out, how decisions are made about meat production and meat consumption really matter. And the debate is one that is not necessarily as strongly on the table as it needs to be. But because water is a potential crisis, because water is an issue that is going to come big and strong and ever back to the United States because of the West Coast, there needs to be consideration. And I would not say that one route or another was better. I'm incredibly appreciative of the skills of scientists in being able to improve the conversion efficiencies and to be able to manage on very little amounts of water. But we need to make choices as a society and as people about that. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions if anyone has any, and if not, we'll move on to the meat panel.
How many minutes did I do?
No questions?
Yeah, sure. So you've heard of phoenixes, have you? Yeah, okay. So I'm the dead egg, or I'm the burning phoenix. I came into an organization, unfortunately, I found that it wasn't quite what I had hoped. And so we did not manage to save that financially. And a few months ago, we had to file for bankruptcy. And the organization is now bankrupt. But like any phoenix and like the hopes of most people who wanted to see Water Footprint Network survive, 3 different small consultancy companies have bought the IP, the intellectual property rights, and they will grow an organization to carry out the sort of work that we've been doing. But it won't really start until January, and it won't be able to take on the sort of volume of work that we've been doing. So there's a slight amount of loss and some frustrated clients, but we've palmed most of them off to the most suitable, efficient organizations or consultants that could do that. So we're relatively clean, but we're dead. And so watch this space. Same website, same logo will be used, and I'm sure that the same interest and the same professionalism will be taken on by all of those involved. So the website will be there. And perhaps from your point of view, the aspect that is interesting is that the Water Footprint Research Alliance, which is all the scientists, they are very strongly combining, talking with each other and trying to ensure that all of the good lessons are being transferred and being moved and that people can find a solution to a problem. And that's particularly important because there are a lot of people that work on the issues, doing the analysis, papers being produced all the time. And there is a training methodology which we've done, which will need to be done in training more people to do water footprints. And there's training courses online, and there will be physical training courses carried out by University of Twente or Free State of South Africa. So a slight drop. Unfortunate for those who've been involved and employed, but it's what happens sometimes. And apparently we're in the same boat as Donald, so it's fine. You know. It's great. It's great. We're going to love it.
In the front, go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you offer any lessons learned from the experience of the Water-Footprint Network and what went wrong for other corporations trying to occupy a similar space?
Yeah. If you have to manage an organization, it's very important to have a tight eye on cash flow. It's good to get a balance between your income from projects and your income from core. You need to have a clear strategy about how you're going to manage to fill the gap. And you need to have the number of staff that you can pay. But apart from that, I think the MBAs that are predominantly provided by excellent institutions in the US would give anybody an idea. I can tell you how to do it on a personal level. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. But you have to have some experience to be able to start being, or start looking in the right direction. It took me a week to see where the problems were. But, you know, I've been around. I never did an MBA, though.
Right here.
So just a question about, you know, as Water Footprint Network gets back up, you know, in the next year or so.
Yeah.
What are some key gaps that you feel like other groups in the space, other NGOs really need to focus on to address some of those gaps? And also just generally, what do you think really needs to happen in the space, maybe perhaps on the data side, that Water Footprint Network hasn't necessarily gotten to yet?
There's a lot, yeah. It's good that the data is free source, the methodology is visible, and there is more information that needs to be got out from the field. So it's good that there's this large scheme, FAO Water Productivity, where they're looking at large-scale satellite imagery and trying to measure and give the information right to the countries, starting off in Africa and other key regions. But that is only part of the picture. So, for instance, we're going to get from that project down to 100-meter readouts on a regular basis on the water coming in, the water going out, etc. So from a farming point of view, you're in a much better position to make decisions. But it won't make a damn difference unless you're getting to the policymakers in each of the countries. And that gap was one that we were going to do in terms of capacity building, and now we just have to hope somebody else takes it up. It's a biggie. Then the whole of the textile industry is one that we've been heavily involved in, working with various big companies who are very concerned. And they're very interested about how to improve the situation because it's dire. Bangladesh, India. We've got lots of cotton ginning mills. We've got washing, dyeing, finishing mills, and they make money. But they're also bringing down the water level by 2 meters every year. So this is not terribly good for a longer term, and they don't have a way of being able to solve that because people need money, and we're not quite sure how that's going to play out. We've got problems coming up from EU. The issues there are that as we have shown the EU which are going to be the most difficult crops to manage over the next 20 years with climate change, there will need to be decisions taken politically about what's going to happen. Because there are countries that currently make money from walnuts, or from grapes, or from cotton, or from other things that are suffering under a drying regime. If you're a regional bloc like the EU, you can't necessarily just leave it to the companies to get out, reinvest in another country with more water. They're going to have to look at that. So those are the sorts of levels of issue that are coming up now. Land degradation, migration, all of these relate to water footprint and efficiency. And that will not be taken up initially by the small newborn water footprint network, and we need NGOs particularly to lobby and to analyse and to start advocacy for different solutions.
Great. Thank you so much, Christoper, for an excellent presentation. And we'll give our meet panelists now a couple minutes to set up.